Opening scene. Sound of roaring engines, radio chatter, and flak bursts. Narrator, deep voice. In the freezing skies over Europe. 25,000 feet above the ground, the air shook with thunder. It wasn't a storm. It was the sound of fortresses with wings. They called them B-17. Flying fortresses, heavy bombers built to crush Nazi Germany's war machine. Each one carried 10 men, young, scared and brave beyond their years, and up to 16 machine guns guarding every angle of attack. To German pilots, they seemed impossible to destroy. But one fateful day, even these fortresses fell behind. Cinematic pause, sound fades, slow dramatic music begins. The story of the B-17s is not just a tale of metal and fire. It's about the men inside them, the brotherhood they built in the sky, and how even the most powerful machines can meet their match when the clouds of war grow darker. The fortress is born. In 1935, when the Boeing engineers in Seattle rolled out their new bomber prototype, no one had seen anything like it before. 4 massive engines, a range of over 2,000 miles, and most importantly, enough firepower to defend itself without a fighter escort. Reporters at the unveiling laughed when they saw the rows of guns. One of them said, "This thing looks like a flying fortress." And the name stuck. But this was no ordinary aircraft. The B-17 was built for punishment. Its thick aluminum frame could take bullet holes, lose engines, even have chunks of its wings torn off, and still fly home. It became a symbol of American resilience and a nightmare for the Luftwaffe. Heavenly warriors. By 1943, thousands of B-17s filled the skies over occupied Europe. Their mission, bomb Nazi factories, airfields, and rail lines, to break the backbone of Hitler's war machine. Each mission was a dance with death. Inside a B-17, the crew had no comfort, just frostbite, fear, and faith. Temperatures could drop to 40 degrees Celsius at altitude. Oxygen masks froze. Flak bursts shattered the silence like angry gods. Yet these men, often barely 20 years old, climbed into those planes again and again, believing their firepower could hold the line. 16 guns against the sky. The flying fortress bristled with weaponry. Twin 50-caliber Browning machine guns in the nose. 2 more in the tail. Top turret, belly turret, side windows, every inch covered. A well-trained crew could unleash a storm of lead in every direction. Some bombers even modified their guns, carrying up to 16 in total, turning the air around them into a deadly cage of bullets. German fighter pilots couldn't believe it. When they attacked, they faced a wall of tracers, red, green, yellow, coming at them from every angle. Some called the B-17 the porcupine of the skies. But as the war intensified, the Luftwaffe adapted, and the unthinkable began to happen. The fortress falls behind. Sound, engine sputtering, alarms blaring, gunfire. A B-17 named Lucky Lady 2 was part of a bombing raid over Schweinfurt, a city deep in Germany, known for producing ball bearings essential to Nazi tanks. Hundreds of bombers roared toward the target, escorted by a handful of P-47 Thunderbolts. Halfway there, disaster. Flak burst near the lead formation. Shrapnel ripped through the right wing of Lucky Lady 2. One engine died, then another. She started falling behind. In the air, falling behind meant death. The formation moved on. German radar picked up the straggler. Minutes later, black crosses appeared on the horizon. 6 Messerschmitts closed in, and the flying fortress stood alone, a fortress under fire. Inside, chaos erupted. The top turret gunner shouted, "Bandits!" 6 o'clock high. The pilot, Captain Reynolds, barked, "Hold your fire till they close in!" The German fighters approached in pairs, weaving through the sky with deadly precision. The B-17's 16 guns roared to life, filling the air with tracers. The sound was deafening, a chorus of defiance. 2 fighters broke away smoking, but 4 kept coming. Bullets tore through the fuselage. The radio operator was hit. The ball turret jammed. The oxygen system failed. Still, the crew kept fighting. One of the Germans, Oberleutnant Franz Keller, later recalled, "It was madness. That bomber spat fire from every angle. We could barely get close enough to aim. It felt alive, like it wanted to kill us." The last flight of Lucky Lady 2, for 30 minutes the crippled fortress fought alone. Every time a Messerschmitt dove in, the crew met it with machine gun fury. But the damage was too much. The left wing was burning. The hydraulics were gone. The pilot looked at his co-pilot and whispered, "Tell the boys to bail." One by one, the crew jumped into the cold sky. their parachutes opening like white flowers. Only the pilot and his co-pilot stayed, trying to keep the plane steady long enough for everyone else to escape. Moments later, the B-17's wing snapped. It spiraled downward, flames trailing like a comet, until it vanished into the clouds. Soft piano music begins. When American rescue teams found the survivors days later, they said something unforgettable. That fortress didn't fall, it went down fighting. To the Germans, the B-17 was more than an aircraft. It was a challenge. To the Americans, it was a promise that no matter how high or how hard the war became, they would keep flying, together. But this was only the beginning. Because soon the skies over Germany would turn into hell, and even the flying fortress would not be enough. Opening soundscape, winds whistling, engines humming, radio chatter crackling. Narrator, deep calm voice. When the sun rose over England on August 17, 1943, the men of the 8th Air Force were already awake. In the pale morning light, hundreds of ground crews worked feverishly, loading bombs, testing engines, and checking gun belts. The target today, Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the mission that would be remembered as the Black Thursday of the Air War. The double strike. The Americans had a daring plan. 2 waves of bombers, hitting 2 critical targets deep inside Germany on the same day. Regensburg was home to the Messerschmitt Me 109 factory. Schweinfurt, the heart of Germany's ball-bearing industry. Destroy both, and the Nazi war machine could grind to a halt. At least, that was the hope. Over 370 B-17s took off from bases across England that morning, their silver wings glinting in the dawn light. The ground trembled beneath their engines, 4,000 men rising together into the sky. A fortress sky. The formation stretched for miles, each B-17 flying in tight, precise formation, protecting one another with interlocking fields of fire. It was a fortress wall of metal and determination. Inside the cockpits, young men joked nervously. Some lit cigarettes. Others silently mouthed prayers. Radio chatter filled the headsets. Red leader, this is Blue 3. Formation tight, altitude 20,000. Copy that, Blue 3. Godspeed, boys. They knew the Germans were waiting. Luftwaffe rising. Far across the channel, in the forests of western Germany, the Luftwaffe scrambled. Radar stations picked up the incoming formations. Sirens blared. Achtung! Feindliche Bomber! Richtung Regensburg. Dozens of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s roared into the sky. Among them were some of the deadliest aces in the world, men like Heinrich Erler, Walter Dahl, and Adolf Gallen's protégés. They knew the American bombers were deadly, but they also knew one thing. Every bomber lost meant 10 fewer Americans coming home. The ambush. Sound. Wind rising, engine roar growing louder. As the bombers crossed the Belgian border, the first black puffs of flak appeared. It was like flying through a thunderstorm made of fire. Shells burst around them, rocking the planes. One B-17 took a direct hit to the nose, vanishing in a burst of flame. Then came the fighters. Dozens of German aircraft dove from above, from below, from every direction. Their cannons spat fire, 20mm shells punching holes through aluminum skin. The B-17 gunners fought back fiercely, their 16 guns roaring in defiance. Radio chatter erupted. Tail gunner to pilot, they're all over us. Left waist gunner, I got one. He's going down. Hold formation. Don't break off. But staying in formation meant staying predictable, and the Germans knew exactly where to strike. The fortress wall breaks. One by one, bombers started to fall, engines on fire, wings breaking off, parachutes opening like white petals in the cold sky. Still, the rest pressed forward. The air was chaos. Smoke trails, tracer fire, screams over the radio. A gunner named Sergeant Bill Henderson remembered later. You didn't see faces, just flashes. A fighter would appear out of nowhere, shoot, vanish, and someone from your crew would stop answering. Inside the bombers, gunners moved mechanically, reloading belts, clearing jams, wiping frost from their goggles. They were fighting for their lives, but also for the men beside them. The price of courage. By the time the first wave reached Regensburg, 60 bombers were already gone. But those who made it dropped their bombs precisely. Factories burst into flame, black smoke rising thousands of feet high. The mission was a success, at a terrible cost. On the way home, things got worse. Fuel was running low. Fighter escorts, the P-47 Thunderbolts, had turned back long ago, unable to fly that deep into Germany. The B-17s were alone. The German fighters returned again, relentless. Some attacked in waves, others rammed damaged bombers, desperate to bring them down. A radio transmission from one of the fortresses still haunts historians today. "This is Lucky Strike. We've lost 2 engines. Tail's gone. Tell my mom we did our part. Tell her we didn't run." Static silence. The aftermath. By nightfall, the survivors limped back to their English bases, bullet-ridden, smoking shattered. Some crash-landed on the runways. Others barely made it across the channel. Ground crews counted the holes, hundreds in each aircraft. Of 376 bombers that took off that morning, 60 were shot down. Nearly 600 men never came home. It was one of the darkest days in the history of the U.S. Air Force. But even in tragedy, the Americans refused to back down. Every pilot who survived swore to return and make the skies theirs again. German aces speak. Captured German records later revealed their shock. One pilot wrote in his logbook, "We hit them with everything, cannons, rockets, even ramming attacks, and still they came. These fortresses bleed, but they don't die." Even Luftwaffe ace Walter Dahl admitted, to face a box of B-17s was to fly into hell itself. You could destroy one, maybe 2, but the rest would chew you to pieces. A message from the skies. When General Ira Eaker, commander of the 8th Air Force, was told of the casualties, he simply said, "They'll go back again, because the men who fly those ships are the bravest in the world," and they did. Within weeks, new B-17 formations were already rolling down the runways, repaired, rearmed, and ready to strike again. But now something had changed. The Americans realized that the Flying Fortress, no matter how many guns it carried, couldn't win alone. They needed long-range fighter escorts, and soon, a new legend would rise from the sky. The P-51 Mustang. The B-17s had proven their courage and their cost. They turned the skies red over Germany and taught the world the meaning of endurance. But the next chapter of the air war would be even bloodier and even more extraordinary, because when the fortresses flew again, they wouldn't be a lone opening. Sound of engines screaming at high altitude. By late 1943, the B-17 crews had learned a harsh truth. Even 16 guns could not protect them forever. Without fighter escort, the Luftwaffe tore through their formations like wolves among sheep. Every mission into Germany became a coin toss between life and death. But across the Atlantic, a solution was being built, one that would change the air war forever. The birth of a guardian. At a factory in Inglewood, California, engineers at North American Aviation were working on a new fighter. Sleek, fast, deadly. Its name, the P-51 Mustang. Originally designed for the British Royal Air Force, the Americans quickly realized its potential. When they fitted it with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, it transformed into a machine of pure magic, capable of flying over 440 miles and escorting bombers deep into enemy territory. The B-17s finally had a guardian, the first escort. January 1944. The mission, deep strike into Brunswick, Germany. For the first time, the B-17s had company all the way to the target. P-51s from the 354th Fighter Group. A B-17 radio operator described it perfectly. It felt like angels had descended from heaven. They stayed with us, all the way in, all the way out. The German fighters dove in, but this time the Mustangs dove back. The sky erupted in dogfights, contrails twisting like white serpents. The Americans were no longer the hunted. They were the hunters. The Luftwaffe shock. Luftwaffe ace Heinrich Erler admitted, "We didn't expect them to follow us that deep. Suddenly they were everywhere. Above us, behind us, even below." Within weeks, German losses skyrocketed. The tables had turned. For the first time since the war began, the Americans ruled the skies over Germany. And the B-17s, those massive, bullet-riddled fortresses, could finally breathe again. The human cost. But victory came with a price. Many B-17 crews still never made it home. Some planes returned with holes so large you could see daylight through them. Others landed with half their crews gone. Captain James Doolittle, now commander of the 8th Air Force, said, "We can replace planes, we can replace engines, but we can never replace these boys." Still, they flew because they knew what was at stake. Every bomb dropped meant one step closer to ending the nightmare. The fortress spirit. Despite their scars, the flying fortresses kept coming. They bombed Berlin. They bombed Hamburg. They broke the back of German industry. And in every mission, the bond between crews grew stronger. In the barracks at night, men shared stories of the ones who didn't come back. They drank, laughed, cried, then prepared to fly again at dawn. Narrator, softly. They weren't fighting for glory. They were fighting for each other. The fall of the hunters, 1,000 words. Opening radio crackle, German voices shouting, Achtung! Mustangs! By 1944, the Luftwaffe was bleeding. Fuel was scarce. Experienced pilots were dying faster than they could be replaced. And the skies above Germany. Once their hunting ground had turned into a graveyard. The turning tide. The Americans launched Operation Argument, known to the crews as Big Week. In February 1944, thousands of B-17s and B-24s bombed German aircraft factories day and night. Their escort, P-51 Mustangs. The Luftwaffe threw everything they had into the fight. Hundreds of German fighters took off, Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs, even experimental jets, but they were overwhelmed. In just 6 days, Germany lost nearly 600 aircraft and hundreds of its best pilots. It was the beginning of the end. The Ace's last stand. Oberleutnant Franz Keller, the German pilot who once faced the Lucky Lady II, now found himself on the other side of the storm. He led his last mission near Leipzig. Fuel running low, outnumbered 3-1. He saw the endless waves of fortresses above and the Mustangs, circling like hawks. I realized, he later said, we were no longer hunters. We were prey. A Mustang dove past his wing, guns blazing. His Messerschmitt caught fire. He bailed out, parachuting into the smoke-filled countryside, one of the few aces to survive the war. Fortress of fire. Even as victory drew near, danger never left the bombers. A B-17 named Sweet Lorraine took a direct hit over Leipzig. One wing was gone, half the crew wounded. But the pilot refused to abandon ship. He held the controls steady, guiding the crippled bomber back toward England. When they finally landed, the base commander said, I don't know how she stayed in the air. The pilot just smiled. She's a fortress. That's what she does. The cost of glory. By the spring of 1944, the Americans had achieved air superiority, but the toll was staggering. Over 30,000 airmen killed in the European campaign, thousands more wounded or captured. Yet their sacrifice meant everything. Without them, the D-Day landings, the liberation of Europe, might never have happened. Narrator. The skies they died to clear became the pathway to freedom. Voices from the past. Years later, surviving German and American pilots met, once enemies, now old men. One German said, we were boys fighting boys. None of us wanted it, but we had no choice. And an American gunner replied, we were all just trying to make it home. The Fortress Legacy, 1,000 words. Opening a sound of distant propellers fading into silence. The war ended in 1945. Europe lay in ruins. The skies once filled with death were quiet again. But the legend of the flying fortress lived on. The last mission. April 1945, the final bombing run over Germany. A formation of B-17s flew across the Rhine, dropping supplies instead of bombs. The crews looked down, cities reduced to ashes, rivers clogged with wreckage. No enemy fighters rose to meet them. The war in the air was over. When they landed, mechanics and ground crew surrounded the fortresses, touching their scarred metal. The bullet holes, the names painted on their sides. Heaven Sent, Memphis Belle, Sweet Lorraine, Lucky Lady II. Each name told a story of courage, fear, friendship, and sacrifice. The unbreakable spirit. Many airmen returned home broken, physically and emotionally. But they carried something unshakable within them. The knowledge that they had stood in the face of death and didn't flinch. A surviving pilot wrote in his diary, every time I hear thunder, I remember the sound of flak. Every time I see clouds, I remember the faces of my crew, what they left behind. After the war, thousands of B-17s were scrapped, melted down into metal for the peacetime world. Only a handful survived. One sits today in a museum, still bearing the scars of battle. Bullet holes patched but never forgotten. Visitors touch the cold metal and whisper, how did they ever fly this through hell? And the answer lies not in the metal, but in the men. Across enemy lines, in 1946, a remarkable reunion took place. The surviving crew of Lucky Lady II met Franz Keller, the German pilot who had attacked them years earlier. Instead of hatred, there was understanding. Keller saluted them and said, you were brave men. You fought with honor. I am proud to have faced you. They shook hands, former enemies. Now bound by respect only warriors can understand. Legacy of the Fortress. Today, the B-17 Flying Fortress remains a symbol of endurance. It wasn't just an airplane. It was a message that courage, teamwork, and faith can make men fly higher than fear. Narrator, closing voice. When the German pilots first saw them, they called them impossible. When they fought them, they called them invincible. And when they watched them fall, they called them unforgettable. The B-17 Flying Fortress, the plane that turned ordinary men into legends. Opening scene, firestorm sounds, bomb bay doors opening, faint radio static. Narrator, somber tone. By early 1945, the war was nearly won, but the sky was still burning. Germany's armies were retreating, its cities shattered, yet the bombers kept coming. The B-17s, those iron giants that had once been symbols of hope, now carried a darker burden. The task of breaking what was left of the Nazi war machine. Operation Thunderclap. The Allies planned a massive air offensive to crush the German spirit once and for all. The target, Dresden, a city of art, culture, and history, but also a key transport hub for Nazi troops. On February 13, 1945, the sky above Dresden darkened, not from clouds, but from the shadows of more than 800 flying fortresses. Each carried tons of bombs, each flown by young men who had seen too much of death. At 10 p.m., the first bombs fell. The firestorm. What followed was beyond imagination. The old city erupted into flame. Streets turned into rivers of fire. The air itself began to burn. People were trapped in bomb shelters, suffocating as oxygen vanished. A B-17 navigator looking down whispered into his radio, "God forgive us. The whole city is on fire." Even the German defenders, watching from afar, were speechless. The fire rose so high that British and American crews could see it 200 miles away. It was the most devastating air raid in European history. The weight of victory. For the men who flew those missions, victory came with guilt. Many had lost friends in previous raids. Now they were asked to destroy cities full of civilians. They followed orders, but the faces of those below haunted them forever. One pilot wrote in his diary, "We were told it was a military target, but when I looked down, all I saw was fire and souls." The fortress in the flames. Several B-17s never made it back that night. Flak and German night fighters still fought desperately. One bomber, Star of the West, was hit, her right wing ablaze. Instead of bailing out over enemy territory, the pilot turned his crippled plane away from the city and into the dark horizon. He vanished into history. His crew's names carved later on a memorial stone in England. The end of an era. After Dresden, even the most hardened airmen felt the war's weight. They had survived the worst skies imaginable, Schweinfurt, Berlin, Hamburg, and now they had seen what victory looked like. Smoke, silence, and ghost. The Flying Fortress had done its duty, but its heart, the men inside, would never be the same. May 1945. Nazi Germany surrendered. The guns finally fell silent. And for the first time in years, the skies were clear. The journey home. B-17 crews returned to America, heroes but broken ones. They stepped off ships and trains, greeted by waving flags and tears. But in their eyes was something deeper, memories that would never fade. A gunner said during a reunion years later, "We came home, but part of us stayed up there, somewhere above the clouds." The fortresses retire. In hangars across Europe, the mighty B-17s were lined up for the last time. Engines quiet. Bomb bays empty. Paint chipped and scorched by flak and fire. Mechanics wept as they dismantled them, their wings folded like tired angels. Of the 12,700 B-17s built, only a few dozen survived the war intact. The rest became scrap metal, melted into the peacetime world they had helped create. The German perspective. Even their enemies respected them. German ace Adolf Galland once said, "The Flying Fortress was the most honorable enemy. It never surrendered easily, and its men never gave up." For the Luftwaffe survivors, memories of those battles never faded. Many later admitted, "When we saw a fortress formation, we knew it was death, but we also knew it was courage." The legacy lives on. Today, only a handful of B-17s still fly, in museums, air shows, and films. When their engines start, old veterans cry. The sound brings back everything: youth, bravery, and the friends who never came back. And when the sun glints off their silver wings, people still look up and remember what they stood for. The final flight. In 2019, a restored B-17, nicknamed 909, crashed during a demonstration flight. 7 people lost their lives. The world mourned, because it wasn't just an old airplane that died that day. It was a reminder of a generation that once ruled the skies and paid for peace with their blood. Narrator, softly. The fortress may rest now, but its story still flies. Background music, slow orchestral build, with engine rumble fading into silence. Narrator, final words. They called them flying fortresses. Machines built for war, flown by boys who became men, and remembered by a world that still looks up in awe. Some never made it home. Some did, but left their hearts in the clouds. Yet all of them, together, they changed the course of history. The B-17 Flying Fortress, proof that courage has wings. Fade to black, engine roar echoes one last time.